Story 1. The motel room at the end of the hallway. When I first moved into that cheap rental near campus, I thought I had found a hidden gem. It was small, yes, but it fit my budget, and the landlord promised it was quiet. My room was at the very end of a narrow corridor that always seemed darker than the rest of the building. There was only one window, and it faced an abandoned house across the alley. Its shutters broken, its paint peeling, a place you would never want to stare at for too long. At first, I brushed it off. I told myself I just needed a space to study, nothing more. But nights in that room felt different. The building would fall silent. Yet around midnight, I often heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, like someone pacing back and forth right outside my door. Every time I gathered the courage to open it, the corridor stretched empty, with only the flickering light bulb at the far end humming faintly. I laughed it off to my friends, blaming thin walls or other tenants. But deep down, I knew those steps were too close, too real. Then came the night that changed my certainty. I was working late, books scattered across the desk, when a sudden flash cut through the shadows. At first, I thought it was lightning, but the sky was clear. The light moved again, a thin beam sliding across the floor, coming from the gap beneath my door. Someone was outside, someone holding a flashlight, deliberately sweeping it across the threshold, as if testing how I would react. My chest tightened. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The light lingered for several seconds before vanishing, leaving the hallway silent once more. That was the moment I understood this wasn't coincidence. It wasn't the creaks of an old building or my imagination. Someone was there, watching, waiting. And if they could bring a flashlight right up to my door without a sound, then they already knew more about me than I was ready to admit. One evening, as I sat at my desk trying to finish an assignment, something caught my eye. The surface of the table, which I had wiped clean earlier, now carried faint smudges. At first I thought it was just time 6 5s. But as I leaned closer, my stomach dropped. They were fingerprints. Clear marks of a hand pressed against the wood, right beside the window. The unsettling part was not just the prints themselves, but the direction. They weren't mine. They looked as though someone had reached inward, from him, outside the glass, and rested their hand exactly where I kept my books. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe I had leaned there without noticing. But the shape, the spread of the fingers, it was wrong. My hand didn't match. That night, I went to the landlord, hoping for some logical explanation. Time 0.95s. He listened, frowning, then shook his head. His words still echo in me. That room has been locked for years before you moved in. No one should be inside. And that house across from your window, it's been empty for decades. I wanted to believe he was just exaggerating, but the calm certainty in his voice made me feel colder than the winter air seeping through the cracks. The following night, I decided to test my own fears. I placed a small camera in the corner, set it to record while I tried to sleep. Hours passed in silence until time 6 5s. Sometime after 3, a faint creak woke me. My eyes stayed shut, too heavy with fear to open. Morning came, and with trembling hands, I played back the footage. What I saw made my blood run cold. The door to my room, which I had locked myself, slowly eased open. Time 00.95s. A shadow slipped through, vague but human-shaped. The figure sat down at my desk, the very chair where I studied each night, and lingered there motionless, watching the bed. Then, without sound, it vanished. When the recording ended, the chair stood empty, exactly as I found it at dawn. That was the moment I realized I was no longer alone in that room. Story 2. Messages from strange numbers. After the divorce, I thought the hardest part was over. The silence of an empty apartment felt heavy at first, but at least it was mine. No arguments, no accusations, just quiet. Time 095s. That peace lasted only a week before the first message came through. A number I didn't recognize lit up my phone with a single line. "You still locking your doors carefully, right?" I stared at it for a while, confused. It wasn't threatening on the surface, but there was something unsettling about the tone. Almost playful, almost familiar. I ignored it, assuming it was a wrong number. But the next night, the same number returned with another question. "Do you still check the windows before bed?" That time, my chest tightened. Those were the exact words my ex-wife used to throw at me during our late-night arguments. She used them like weapons, mocking the little routines I clung to. At first, I thought maybe she was behind it. Some twisted way of keeping control even from a distance. But she had moved across the state. We hadn't spoken in months. Friends told me I was being paranoid, that maybe she still had my number. But when I confronted her through a mutual contact, time 0.65s, she swore she hadn't reached out once. Still, the texts kept coming. Always short, always echoing her voice. Questions she used to ask when she wanted to pick a fight. "Do you even sleep at night? You still afraid of the dark?" They weren't random. They were too personal, too sharp, like someone had copied her script word for word. What disturbed me most wasn't just the familiarity, it was the timing. The messages always came late, around the hour she used to stay up pacing the living room. And when I'd glance at the door, after reading them, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing just beyond it. That's when I realized these weren't just messages. They were reminders. A way of telling me that even though I lived alone now, I was never truly alone. One evening, I was stretched out on the couch, half watching a mindless show on time 0.65, trying to convince myself that life was finally settling down. That was when my phone buzzed on the table beside me. I glanced over, expecting a routine notification, but the words on the screen froze me in place. "I'm standing right outside your door." At first, I thought it was another cruel trick, just text meant to get inside my head. But the longer I stared at the message, the heavier the air in the apartment felt, like the walls themselves were waiting for me to respond. Against better judgment, I stood up and walked toward the door. My pulse hammered as I unlocked it, each click echoing too loudly in the silence. I yanked the door open, time expecting something. But the hallway stretched empty, still and silent. For a brief second, I almost laughed. Maybe I was the fool. Maybe it was just an elaborate prank. Then I looked down. Lying on the floor in front of my doorway was a photograph. I picked it up with shaking hands, and when I turned it over, I nearly dropped it. It was me. Not a picture from years ago, not one taken by friends. It was me, asleep on my sofa, taken from the corner of the very room I stood in now. Same blanket, same shirt, same position I had been in just hours earlier. Someone had been inside. After that, sleep became impossible. Every creak in the apartment made me sit up straight. Every shadow felt alive. I installed a small camera in the living room, desperate for proof that I wasn't losing my mind. For a few days, nothing happened, and I started to believe maybe it was over. But then, late one night, another message arrived. This one shorter, sharper, colder. You will never live alone. I bolted upright and rushed to check the camera. The small device I had pinned my sanity on was gone. The mount still clung to the wall, but the camera itself had been ripped off, wires dangling. The memory card, everything, was missing. Whoever had been inside knew exactly how to cover their tracks. That was when the truth settled in, heavier than anything before. The texts weren't just messages. The photo wasn't just a warning. This was someone weaving themselves into my life, erasing the line between privacy and violation. And as I stood there in that empty apartment, clutching my useless phone, I understood something terrifying. If they could enter without leaving a trace, then no lock, no camera, no precaution would ever truly keep me safe. Story 3, Weekend House. We thought it would be the perfect getaway. Time, 9:05. 6 friends, a quiet wooden cabin by the lake, and 2 nights with no responsibilities, just laughter and stories by the fire. The cabin looked cozy at first glance, but like most old houses, it carried a certain weight in the air. The living room smelled faintly of dust. The walls creaked with every shift of the wind. And in the corner of the hallway was a door that led down to the basement. The lock on it was flimsy, barely hanging on, and none of us wanted to be the one to open it. That first night, after a long day of exploring the lake, we settled into the living room with drinks in hand. Around midnight, the laughter died down as we heard it. 3 slow knocks echoing from beneath the floorboards. The sound came from the basement door. We froze. Someone joked it was just a raccoon, and we laughed nervously, but the unease lingered. Eventually, we convinced ourselves it was nothing more than animals scratching around. Still, none of us dared to check. Morning brought sunlight and relief, until we walked into the kitchen for breakfast. Sitting neatly in the center of the dining table was a tarot card. The devil, placed face up, deliberately, as if someone had left it for us to find. None of us owned a deck. None of us had even touched that table after dinner. For a long moment, we stood staring at it, silent, because every excuse we had tried to lean on the night before suddenly felt useless. It wasn't just the sound of knocks anymore. This was personal, intentional. Someone, or something, wanted to remind us that the basement wasn't empty. And by leaving that card, it wanted us to know that whatever game had begun, we were already part of it. The second night carried an uneasiness none of us wanted to admit. We tried to convince ourselves the tarot card had some rational explanation. Maybe it was left behind by a previous guest. Maybe someone had simply overlooked it. But deep down, time 0.65s. It's us. Each of us knew the truth. That card wasn't there when we arrived. Around 2 in the morning, one of my friends slipped out of the bedroom to use the bathroom. Minutes later, he came back pale, whispering that there was someone sitting in the kitchen. His voice trembled, but he swore he had seen the outline of a figure, time 0.65, motionless, hunched at the table in the dim light. None of us wanted to believe him, yet we all felt the same chill settle over the room. We gathered our courage and went together, 6 people armed with flashlights and whatever heavy objects we could find. The kitchen was silent when we arrived. No figure at the table, time 0.65s. Hans. No stranger waiting for us. But on the floor, just below the chair where the shadow had been seen, was another tarot card. This time, it was the Fool. It hadn't been there earlier. Someone, or something, wanted us to see it. That discovery broke whatever sense of safety we had left. We stayed awake the rest of the Solmasun night, jumpy at every sound, flinching at every creak of the cabin walls. By dawn, our nerves were shredded. We packed quickly, agreeing without argument that we would cut the trip short. No one needed convincing. As we loaded the last bags into the car, one of my friends glanced back at the cabine. Time 9:05s. His face drained of color, and the rest of us followed his stare. At the second-story window, behind the cracked glass, stood a figure. Its body was still, but its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, hidden beneath a grotesque clown mask. One pale hand lifted slowly, waving at us as though mocking our fear, bidding farewell. None of us spoke as we drove away. The air in the car was heavy, each of us locked in our own thoughts, too afraid to break the silence. We never reported it, never looked back, and even now, whenever the subject comes up, we all agree on one thing: whatever was in that cabin wasn't meant to be. Understood. And that clown mask, that final wave from the window, was the promise that it wasn't the house we were leaving behind. It was something that might still be following us.